I know how it feels when you scroll through a dozen gaming laptop listings, see those glossy images, and think, this is the machine that will finally let me hit 144 frames per second on Cyberpunk without the laptop screaming. Then you get it, set it up on your desk, and the performance feels a lot less magical than the ads promised. That gap between expectation and reality is why I'm doing this deep dive, so you can avoid that disappointment before you hand over your hard-earned money. Link is in the description if you want to check the product details on Amazon. The msi Cyborg 15.6-inch AI gaming laptop tries to bridge that gap with a hefty 10-core Intel 7240H processor, an RTX 5070 GPU, and a 144Hz IPS panel. On paper, it sounds like a portable version of a desktop beast. But the real question is, does it actually hold up when you fire it up for a 2-hour gaming session, a Zoom call, or a quick video edit on a coffee shop table? I've spent the last week testing the unit in a handful of everyday scenarios that most buyers actually encounter, not just the benchmarks-only tests you see on manufacturer sites. First, let's talk about who this laptop is built for. If you're a competitive esports player who lives in a dorm, a small apartment, or travels for LAN tournaments, the 15.6-inch chassis and the 144Hz refresh rate are immediately useful. You'll notice the smoother motion in fast shooters, and the screen size is a sweet spot between portability and immersion. The backlit keyboard also has a decent travel distance, which helps when you're gaming in dim rooms or late-night sessions. On the other side of the spectrum, if you're a creator who spends most of the day in Adobe Premiere or Blender, you'll appreciate the RTX 5070's hardware-accelerated ray tracing cores for rendering previews, but you'll also feel the limitations of a 16GB DDR5 kit when you start juggling multiple 4K timelines. In that case, you might end up adding more RAM later, which isn't a huge hassle but does add cost. Now for the practical strengths. The first thing I noticed after unboxing was the cooling solution. MSI calls it residential cooler, and in practice the laptop stays surprisingly calm during a 30-minute Fortnite match at high settings. The fans spin up, but the acoustic profile stays in the low to mid 30 dB range, which is quiet enough that you can still have a conversation without shouting over it. That's a big win for anyone who lives in a shared space or streams with a microphone nearby. The Wi-Fi 6E module also lives up to its promise. When I moved the laptop to my balcony and tested a 200 megabits per second download, the connection stayed stable, and there was no noticeable drop when the signal strength dipped slightly. For gamers who rely on low latency, that reliability matters. Another real-world advantage is the storage layout. The 1TB NVMe SSD feels instant when you launch games or open large Photoshop files. I didn't have to wait for the OS to catch up after a Windows update, which is something I've seen happen with some laptops that ship with a smaller drive and rely on external storage for games. The SSD's capacity also gives you room to keep a decent library of AAA titles without immediately needing an external enclosure. But the laptop isn't without its trade-offs. Battery life is the most noticeable weakness. With the screen at 144Hz and the RTX 5070 running, I could barely stretch a full gaming session past 1.5 hours before the charger became a necessity. Even when I dialed the display down to 60Hz and turned off the GPU boost, I was looking at roughly 3 hours of mixed-use gaming, streaming, a bit of web browsing. If you need a machine that can last a full workday unplugged, you'll want to consider a different model or keep a power brick on hand. Thermals also reveal a subtle compromise. While the laptop stays cool on the surface, the internal temperatures climb into the high 80s Celsius under sustained load, like a 45-minute Elden Ring raid. The system throttles just enough to keep the fan noise reasonable, but you'll see a small dip in frame rates after the first half hour. That's something competitive players should be aware of. The laptop can still deliver high FPS, but you might need to lower settings or accept a slight performance dip during marathon sessions. The display, though bright enough for indoor gaming, falls short in a brightly lit room. The IPS panel peaks at about 300 nits, which is fine for a dorm or a dark room, but when you try to game near a window, the blacks wash out and the colors lose punch. If you often game on a coffee shop table with natural light streaming in, you'll probably reach for a hood or a matte screen protector. On the flip side, the color accuracy is decent out of the box for a gaming laptop, so you won't need to calibrate if you do occasional photo editing. One hidden cost that shows up after a few weeks is the keyboard's lack of a dedicated macro row. MSI's Cyborg line markets the backlit keyboard as a gamer's